Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Episode 2 of the Pole Position Podcast. You've got Mac and you've got Nadir, and we're going to dive into some of the juicy off the track headlines for Formula One here in early 2022, first 3 months. As always, seems like never a week goes by without, another controversy or firestorm rocking the world of Formula One. But Nadir, that's why we love it, right?
Yep.
Something that's really hit everybody pretty hard early in the season, and this goes for everybody worldwide, is this Russia and Ukraine situation, and it kind of feels like no part of the globe has been untouched by it, and that includes our little world here in Formula One, Nadir. So last year was the first season for Russian driver Nikita Mazepin, who, just for a little bit of context, Formula One is one of the, I guess, the few sports in the world that you can really use money to buy your way to the top, Nadir. So in this situation, his father, Dmitry Mazepin, a Russian oligarch and CEO of Uralkali, a Russian, what do they sell? Fertilizer company.
Yeah.
Became a major sponsor in the Haas F1 team, an American team, pretty noteworthy for its financial struggles, to put a contending team on the track over the last few seasons. He invested in the team in order to get his son on the grid for Formula One. So Mazepin spent his first year not much to talk about other than the countless errors he made on the track. Kind of a bit of an embarrassment for the team, for Formula One overall, that somebody with his skills could get a position, but this is just the environment of Formula One. But, when this whole Russia situation went down, the sports world was kind of looked upon to, make a stand and, create some consequences for Russia. And as a result, Formula One, I think, they were one of the first canceling the Sochi Grand Prix, and then taking it even a step further and deciding to cancel Mazepin's contract at Haas, as well as Haas canceling the sponsorship from Nikita Mazepin's father. So, Nadir, pretty unprecedented set of circumstances we have. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole situation here?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting situation. I guess before this whole Ukraine Russia thing happened, and we got our focus on the Haas team, we didn't realize that the US team was actually sponsored by a Russian oligarch, and had a Russian driver in that. So I think that kind of last season when Haas was struggling financially, it needed a sponsor. It was a desperate situation for them. I think it raises a lot of questions in terms of the sport itself. I call it the revival of F1 after the Netflix documentary. I think the sport was dying. Does not make a lot of sense in terms of the combustion engine, putting research and money into a combustion engine when the whole of the world is moving towards electric cars. But I think that documentary singularly kind of revived the whole sport. And the sport still has a lot of questions to answer, interestingly, in terms of what the business structure behind these teams are. And Mazepin, by the way, is not the only guy there. Lance Stroll, is kind of the product of the same sponsorship model. So I think that F1 taking a stand was pretty interesting pretty early on. Sochi is a big race, but the sport overall, I think, needs to figure out when it comes to Mazepin and what his performance was last year on track. I think not only his nationality, I think that's a separate issue, but his skill, I think it was dangerous on the track for to be on the track with so many quality drivers and teams around who would work all year long to make it happen, and then you have a very dangerous driver in the top grid of Formula One.
Yeah, so like, I mean, ultimately the decision was made based on his Russian nationality and trying to get consequences on Russia. But like, there was no doubt, while there are other paid drivers, right? I think this was the most obvious situation in somebody being a paid driver and being out of their league. Right? Yeah. Like, correct. He was obviously, not at the level he needed to be. There's been other paid drivers and they've struggled, but not to the degree of Mazepin's struggles last year. Do you think, Nadir, like, when Formula One's going about making this decision to get Mazepin out of the sport, at least for now, until the situation, de-escalates, do you think that's as easy a decision if he was performing better on track?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If it was one of the bigger, higher performing drivers. I think that because the situation right now has escalated so much, we might have still seen an exit for a Russian driver. But I think it wouldn't have been this easy of a decision for Haas itself as well. Haas has kind of waited so long to make a car around their drivers, and to bring a driver, right at the start of the season, it's just not that easy. So I think, yeah, you're right. If he wasn't, so much out of his league, it would have been a very difficult scenario, and I think we've seen it on the other sports as well, like tennis. Those decisions are not that easy.
For sure, yeah. You've seen a lot of sports that have, taken, I don't know if you would call it half measures, but maybe not as strong, like a tennis where, Russian athletes are still able to compete. They just cannot compete under the Russian banner, so to speak. It was interesting to see Mazepin's comments and reaction after it all went down, saying, that he was willing to do whatever it took, like along those lines, to stay in the sport and stay competing for 2022, whether that was, denouncing Russia or whatever it may be. But, whatever it was, just wasn't good enough, I guess, for Formula One and the Haas team. And so, they decided to part ways anyway. Do you think that Formula One should have gone that far with it? Because, other sports have seemed to, take differing paths on this. And it seems like to kick somebody out like that, do you see it as a problem that you're penalizing a Russian citizen so strongly for actions of their government? When he says he's willing to, take some steps to help, with the situation on your side, but yet, it's just not good enough.
Yeah, I think this is a very broad debate that the world needs to have. Because from my own point of view on all of this, not only Formula One situation, but whole of the sports reacting, I personally do not think this is the way to go. Because I think sports has a bigger meaning, has always had a bigger meaning, other than, which is far bigger than the business behind the sport, or how, the image of a particular sport looks like. It's sports kind of presents you with an opportunity to, with all those differences, still present you with an opportunity to interact and humanize each other, right? It goes both ways. For me, when you have a North Korean team in the Olympics, when you have all the Olympics, if you see the history, I think with all those conflicts going on, there has been countries still playing in. So it's like a bigger debate, but I do not think an individual who has nothing to do with the decision itself should have direct impact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think generally speaking, I probably
yeah,
agree with you. I think it's just a unique case here. I think that I feel bad for Nikita Mazepin because he's kind of tied up in all of this. But I think probably if you look back on why Formula One has done this, I think it's because of the connections between his father and
yeah,
the government,
exactly.
right? I
Yeah,
think if that connection wasn't there,
yeah,
so I'm not trying to say that I'm, an expert on Russian politics or
yeah,
anything, but Dmitry Mazepin, the father,
yeah,
is considered what they call to be an oligarch,
yeah,
a wealthy individual connected very closely with the government, with Vladimir Putin.
right.
So essentially, I think the idea is by, you know, uh, penalizing him, that's going to have more of an effect on the government directly, by, trying to create negative impacts on those most directly associated with financing the government and, by circumstance of that financing the war, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah,
So I think if that connection wasn't there, maybe this like severe action wouldn't have been taken. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I'm 100%. I mean, if you talk about this particular case, I think particularly because of the circumstance, it wasn't wrong. Also the whole Olympic thing that was going on, which was kind of proven that the Russian government itself had been running a very organized, doping program. So I think that definitely makes sense. But on a broader perspective, there's a conflict going on in China, there's a conflict going on in Middle East. There are so many countries involved there. How do you make this decision for them, right? And if there's one unifying force in the world, which is sport, if you start doing that, with sports, I think we will not have a platform to interact with each other and solve our differences.
Well, it's interesting you bring up that point because we're actually recording this, just about 3 hours after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix has just finished, and there's no shortage of controversy around that government and around, you know, they have, made investments in several areas of sports internationally, but I think having Formula One in Saudi Arabia is certainly like a flagship event for them.
Yeah.
It's something they can draw a lot of promotion and goodwill off of, but that government, it's not without controversy, and even
Yeah.
there were explosions nearby the track this weekend
Right.
that really traces back to some of the conflicts that they are ongoing in right now. It's a pretty direct reminder of everything going on with that country and that situation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a debate that the world needs to have. It should be. I think we should not avoid this debate. As far as the expansion of multiple sports, with Middle East in the last decade investing heavily on mega events and using them to kind of initiate an infrastructure, a program, a sporting culture in the Middle East, using money, all of that. If you consider purely from the expansion perspective, a lot of sports are now, they have a new region to be involved in, which is always good for a sport because it brings a very different perspective, a very different dynamic. But as far as the standards we want to see, in terms of these decisions, are there? We definitely see some hypocrisy. When there's a lot of money involved, you don't tend to make those decisions or even talk about them, right? So as far as this, the recent event is involved, I come from a region where the conflict. There's been a lot of conflicts in the last few years. I think what the world struggles to identify is what is a one-off, what is a random event, and what is a systematic event, and what needs to be dealt with how. As far as this attack is concerned, we know there's a war going on in Yemen, which Saudi is a big part of. The Houthis, which is a very small group, they kind of whatever they have, the limited resources they have, they try and damage the country itself. So as far as this very isolated, a very random attack on Jeddah is involved, I think there's no reason to kind of stop an event going on because if there's not a lot of danger in terms of human lives, because this region has been struggling with this. But there's a broader question, with all the standards that we talk about. Does Saudi really, fulfill those standards, or is it just about money?
Yeah, it's a lot to consider for sure. Just another layer, to everything that's going on in the sport right now, and it's hard. It's so hard to keep politics out of it right now.
Yeah.
It seems it's just such a difficult situation for everybody to deal with, and so many moving parts. But to just bring it back to the Haas situation, so they're missing a driver, which they've now replaced with Kevin Magnussen. A nice reunion, as we talked about in the first episode. But the other half of the coin, the other side of the coin is that they're now missing a major sponsor. And it's a team that's had its share of financial struggles, but it's also I think you might agree with this. It's a great opportunity, I think, as well, for somebody to potentially step in, because right now it's the only American team on the grid, and it's been pretty well documented that the sport is really on fire in North America right now.
Yeah.
Me and you, we're not from the U.S., but now we're both here in the U.S., and we can pretty clearly see this with the Miami Grand Prix coming up next month.
Yeah.
And the Austin Grand Prix already selling out for this season in a matter of days. So with the only American team on the grid, and with just the amazing growth that the sport's seeing, potential opportunities for an American sponsor to step in. What do you think about that? I think the opportunities is you couldn't really think of a more perfect time than right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just the most exciting time for Haas is right now. This season brings in so much for them. Q5 on the first race. Having no contracts and your car is super fast. And pre-season we saw, because of the Formula One expansion, we talked about the Netflix helping the documentary helping them. Some of the teams like McLaren have stuck in some big contracts, right? So I think I don't think the Haas is going to be struggling financially anymore. I think there'll be a lot of sponsors lining up to be, sponsoring the car. I think it's not a lot. It's not a lot of time before we see a big major sponsor, a title sponsor for Haas. But so many other sponsors must be lining up as well. I think it's just a very exciting time for them.
Yeah. exciting times for sure. Another recent announcement here stateside is the Vegas Grand Prix, returning after a very long absence as a third, now a third race in the United States after only having one for so long.
Yeah.
Miami coming in the next month or two here, and now Vegas slated for a 2023 first date.
Right.
What are your thoughts? There's a lot of excitement around that.
Yeah, I think it's obviously whenever the U.S. enters the sport, it brings in a lot of revenue, a lot changes in the sport. I think the sport progresses itself, but I think with all these Grand Prix coming in, because US is a very difficult sports market for a new sport to penetrate because of the history of the sports here. I think we're seeing a very exponential growth, but I think it'll take some time for the sport itself to build a proper fan base like NASCAR has here, like all the other baseball, basketball has here. But obviously the Miami Grand Prix is expected to be just incredible, and I think the both of the cities, Vegas and Miami, are kind of sold on that because they know what this brings in. But in terms of the sport actually penetrating the US market, I think we still have a few more years to go. We also want to see like how the sport is kind of changing itself, adjusting. It's been a purely European sport. How is it making sport more accessible for the other regions of the world, maybe the Asia? We saw an Asian expansion of Formula One, but that result in a lot of kids wanting to become a Formula One driver. We will have to evaluate that, and for me, that's a very important. That is very important for Formula One as a sport itself, because maybe at some time Formula One will have to eventually transition into an electric car, and that transition will be very very hard if these steps are not taken.
Right. Yeah, well, a lot to consider for the future, but there's no doubt that, wherever things do go, that, the steps being taken right now, things look very, very bright in terms of where the sport's going, in terms of popularity worldwide. And like you said, everything, I think, from a sports basis, starts with the United States. If you can capture the United States, alongside the historical, demographics that Formula One has always held, they're going to be in a great spot. So, a lot of exciting developments, and I mean, just so much to talk about Formula One. There's never a dull moment. Every day, every week, seemingly, more and more will come out. So, hopefully, more to discuss in the future. But for now, that's the end of episode 2 for the podcast. Thanks for listening.